C56 on Golden Doves, page 21, we were studying about the mechanistic view of the universe and Rabbi David Nieto's objection to the mechanistic view of the universe. We're on the bottom of page 21. Nieto's other objection to the mechanistic view of the universe is on semiological grounds. So the Jewish people, and I have an article that's about to come out on this, the Jewish people do not conceive of the world in metaphysical in metaphysical terms. Right. So we view the world as a type of writing of God. So any writing is a semiological system. It has meaning. Semiology, signs have meaning, right? So nature is thoroughly opaque and precludes any perception of God. Now, when you say that there's nature, that everything just works perfectly, and there's no need for the clockmaker, right? So nature as a system precludes the existence of a God. Remember when we said that under the world there is God that is, so to speak, allowing the world to function? So the idea of nature precludes God. I have mentioned that David says that God covers the skies with clouds. This is a quote from David Nieto, right? Right. So, Hamchaseh Shamayim Be'avim. That's a pasuk in Tehillim. Hamchaseh Shamayim Be'avim. What does the pasuk mean? So it means that there's clouds, and God brings the clouds, and He covers the sky with the clouds. Hamchaseh Shamayim Be'avim. Now, the mechanistic view of the world will say that, there was whatever forms the clouds, the water vapor rising from the oceans, and then the particular wind directions and the various things that lead to the formation of the clouds and the particular location where the clouds are. So we say no. God is the one who covers that location with clouds. So if it's cloudy in a particular spot, it's God who made it cloudy in that spot, right? So I have mentioned that David says, King David, that God covers the skies with clouds, that God brings down the dew. We say in the Tefillah, Morid Hatal. So the mechanistic view says, no, there's no need for God. It's, the condensation of the water vapor in the atmosphere leads to the formation of dew, right? So we say no. We say, Morid Hatal, God brings the dew. I have also mentioned that the sages of the Talmud teach that it is God who blows the wind. Mashib haruach, right? So this, the mechanistic view would say that there's a difference in air pressure in two spots leads to the blowing of the wind from one spot to the other. In those happy days and pious centuries, no one doubted, as they do nowadays, whether the faculty of nature to function independently is God-given. So the point of David Nieto is that nature works is because God allows nature to work, right? I know this may seem a little counterintuitive to those of you listening to this class. I know you're saying, wait, but what's wrong with saying that you have these scientific rules? And yeah, if you have high air pressure in one spot and low air pressure in the other spot, naturally the air will escape from the high pressure system to the low pressure. I mean, it's just so simple and so intuitive. Why do we need to say there's a God, right? That's a good question. Or let's take another thing. Let's take the force of gravity. So there's a force of gravity, there's mass, and when you have mass by its nature has a gravitational force, and it pulls down things. So when the apple falls off the tree, it's a force of gravity pulling the apple. Why do you need God there, right? So here's the thing. We're also brainwashed into accepting the scientific rules as some sort of dogma, that no one stops and thinks, well, what is the force of gravity? What is it? Why should an object with mass have this gravity? What is it about the object? And why does it pull things, right? How does that work? One of the most fundamental forces of the universe is electromagnetism. I'm referring to the fact that two negatives or two positives, like signs, repel. Unlike signs, attract. But why? What is it in two positives? Let's say you had two electrons, the two electrons will repel each other. Why should that be? I understand we describe it. You're describing something when you say two electrons repel, but why should two electrons repel? Well, because they're negatively charged, and negatively charged, charged objects repel each other. But that's a tautology. You're never really explaining. Science doesn't explain. Science only describes. Right? So we're so used to oh yeah, well of course, this is a rule, there's a force of gravity. And nobody stops and says, well, what is the force of gravity? Why does it do that? We say, the Western world says Mother Nature, but Mother Nature is meaningless. It just doesn't mean anything. How do the birds know how to navigate so well? Oh, they just do it. It's instinct. Again, these words don't explain. The birds are genius. They're brilliant. They can navigate in a way that a human being can't navigate. Why should that be? Right? Mother Nature. Again, Mother Nature provides. What is Mother Nature? Is that alive? I mean, when you say Mother Nature, it's just a tautology. You're just saying the birds have the ability to navigate because the birds have the ability to navigate. You're not saying anything by saying Mother Nature provides. So that's why it's so important. David Nieto's point here is so brilliant because Am Yisrael, we don't have a problem with nature. We don't have a problem with science. We don't have a problem with scientific rules and saying these scientific rules describe how the universe works. Right? Science describes how the universe works most of the time. Scientific rules, however, do not govern the universe. That's so important. I hope you understood that distinction. The governance of the universe is not by science, it's by God. God uses scientific rules to bring out certain outcomes, and generally the outcomes are as we would expect based upon science, but it's not science that governs the world. It's God that governs the world. Science describes what happens most of the time. Science does not describe what happens all of the time. Now, if science governed the world, science should always describe what happens, but it doesn't. And that's the point of David Nieto. It's a brilliant point. Or perhaps I'm reading into David Nieto some of my father's thinking and some of my own thinking. But that point really needs to be understood clearly. We're not anti-science. We're relegating science to its proper place. Science is a system that describes what happens in the world most of the time. The governance of the world, for that you need God. And God can say, yes, most of the time water flows and stays on the earth. That's most of the time. But that's just a practical rule that God put into place. Because God is governing the world and not the scientific rules of the motion of water. Those rules don't govern the world. God governs the world. So God can say, Keriat Yam Suf, and the water splits. Right? If science governed the world, there will be no Keriat Yam Suf. The water will always behave in the same way that it always behaves. Right? So the idea of Keriat Yam Suf is not that there are no scientific rules. There are scientific rules. The idea of Keriat Yam Suf, rather, is that there is a governance to the world, a king to the world, and that king decides. So let's finish the quote of Rabbi David Nieto. In those happy days and pious centuries, no one doubted, as they do nowadays, whether the faculty of nature to function independently is God-given. Everybody understood that nature works because God makes it work. Everything, both immediate and immediate acts, were attributed to God back then. In the centuries closer to our own, what the ancients designated as God has more recently been designated as Hashgacha, providence, or Hashgacha Peratit, right? Later, it further continued to degenerate until it became totally corrupted and changed into Teva, nature. So, first they said everybody understood that it's God. God is Mechaseh Shamayim Be'avim, right? Later on, there was the idea of Hashgacha, but not in the sense that we understand of Hashgacha, but just they said there's some sort of, protection in the world. Let's call that Mother Nature. Mother Nature provides. And later on, they just turned it into nature, Teva. It is the nature of things. With the passing of time, this name gained daily recognition, forming in the minds of the people an image or idol. So Teva, or nature, became a type of Avodah Zarah, which seriously affected their mind and soul. And the belief in nature started affecting the intellectual and spiritual. Thus, the idol of nature was formed, to which, if the knees of the body did not bend, those of the intellect did. So nature is a type of Avodah Zarah. Everybody believes in Mother Nature. Why is Mother Nature better than God? And why does it have to be a mother and not a father? Right? Is that perhaps because of a certain psychological issue called the Oedipal complex, where we reject the father in favor of the mother? So how's that scientific? How is Mother Nature scientific? But rather, is not Mother Nature a reflection of a particular psychological attitude in the Western world? Considering it wise and prudent, yes, nature is wise and prudent, mighty and shrewd, vigilant and active, beneficent and provident. To watch any PBS documentary, watch David Attenborough speak about nature, how wise nature is, how vigilant nature is. They apply to it the attributes which, according to the Hebrew thought, are applicable only to God. So Mother Nature is this wise, benevolent, loving entity. Right? Well, we believe God is loving. But finally, they all fell and succumbed to the belief expressed by the idolatress at the time of Ezekiel, who declared, "The Lord has abandoned the earth, the Lord no longer sees." And the answer is, Azav Elohim et ha'aretz. The reason Mother Nature is superior is because in this way you kill, intellectually, the Father, God, who created the world. That Father is killed, so the creator of the world is over. Azav Elohim et ha'aretz. And you replace it with Mother, or the Son, the loving Son. It can also be the loving Son, right? Or the Mother, the Virgin Mary, right? And the Virgin Mary didn't create the world. We all understand that. Mother Nature didn't create the world. We get that. But it's there protecting the world. So this is just a psychological state of mind. It has nothing to do with science or objective reality. It rather reflects upon the psychological state of the scientists and the people who believe the scientists. Right? So Azav Elohim et ha'aretz is fundamental. The reason Azav Elohim et ha'aretz, the reason God left the world, is not because God left the world. We believe God is still ruling the world. Ki Adonai Elohechem hu Elohei ha'Elohim va'Adonai ha'Adonim, explicitly in Perashat Eiket. So rather, it's important for us to say God left the world because we don't want God in the world. They don't want God, the Creator, in the world, because that is a true King, and that is again, by rejecting God, the Creator, we reject the authority. And instead we have Mother. Now the Mother doesn't have so much authority because it's the Mother, and she didn't create the world, right? But she's protecting the world, right? That's why everybody loves the Virgin Mary. The major objection to nature. Okay, I'm going to stop here.